If you are the one in your family who always felt like the problem, the difficult one, the too sensitive one, the one who asked too many questions and made everyone uncomfortable just by being in the room, I need you to stay with me, because what they called your flaw was never a flaw. It was a frequency they couldn't tune into. And by the end of this, you're going to understand something about your own life that no one in that house was ever able to explain to you. You weren't the broken one. You were the marked one. And there's a difference so vast that most people live their entire lives without ever seeing it. Let me ask you something. How many times did you sit at a table full of people who shared your blood, your last name, your eyes, your laugh, and feel like a stranger? Not because you didn't love them. You probably loved them more than they ever knew. But there was a wall, an invisible distance, like you were watching your own family through glass, hearing their conversations, laughing at the right moments, and the whole time something deep inside you whispering, "These are my people, so why do I feel so alone among them?" That feeling isn't dysfunction. That feeling is recognition. Your spirit recognizing that it was assigned a different road. Think about Joseph for a second. Not the polished Sunday school version, the real boy. The one whose own brothers couldn't stand the sight of him. He wasn't hated because he did something terrible. He was hated because of who he was, because of the dreams that lived in him, because there was a coat on his shoulders that announced, without a single word, that he was set apart. And do you know what set-apart people do to a family that isn't ready for them? They expose things. They become the mirror nobody asked for. The favored son becomes the scapegoat the moment the family decides they'd rather break the mirror than face their own reflection. So they threw him in a pit. Then they sold him. Then they lied about it for years and let their father grieve a son who was still alive. And here's the part I want you to sit with. Joseph didn't do anything to deserve that pit. His only crime was carrying something they couldn't carry. His only offense was being chosen in a house that wasn't built to honor the chosen. If that lands somewhere tender in you, it's because you've lived your own version of that pit. Now, here's what most people miss about the scapegoat. The family doesn't pick the weakest one to blame. That's the lie everyone believes. They think the scapegoat is the failure, the loser, the one who couldn't get it together. But go into almost any wounded family and look closely at who got blamed for everything. It wasn't the weakest. It was the one who saw too clearly, the one who felt everything, the one whose presence made it impossible to keep pretending the house was fine. You were blamed because you were aware. You were the one who noticed when something was off and had the nerve, or the innocence, to say it out loud. You were the kid who asked, "Why is everyone acting normal when nothing about this is normal?" And for that question, you paid. For years. Think about Daniel, carried off as a young man into a kingdom that wasn't his, surrounded by people who didn't share his God or his convictions. They put a different name on him. They put different food in front of him. They tried to reshape him into something that fit their system. And the whole time, Daniel held a line that made him stand out in a way that put a target on his back. He prayed when prayer had been outlawed. He stayed clean when everyone else was feasting from the king's table. And for his integrity, they threw him into a den of lions, not because he'd done anything wrong, but because his faithfulness made everyone else's compromise visible. The people around him couldn't stand the way his light exposed their darkness, so they engineered his downfall. Sound familiar? The chosen are almost always punished for the very thing that makes them chosen. Daniel walked out of that den without a scratch, but he never would have been thrown in if he'd been willing to blend in. And neither would you. That's the cost of being unable to pretend. You couldn't fake it. You couldn't laugh at things that weren't funny, or stay quiet about things that weren't right. And in a family built on a quiet agreement to never name the elephant in the room, the one who keeps pointing at the elephant becomes the enemy. A family that has agreed to live in a comfortable lie cannot tolerate a truth-teller in its midst, so it does what wounded systems always do. It finds the most sensitive member, the one who carries the most light, and it loads all the shame onto that person. You're the dramatic one. You're the sensitive one. You're too much. You're the reason there's tension. And slowly that child starts to believe it, starts to think their own God-given sensitivity is a defect, starts to apologize for the very thing that was meant to be their gift. That's the wound, and it goes deep. But I want to show you something about that wound, because it's about to change the way you see your entire childhood. Why did you start preferring to be alone? Be honest with yourself for a moment. People look at someone who'd rather stay home, who needs hours of silence, who feels drained after being around even people they love, and they call it antisocial. They call it a problem. Some of you have been told your whole lives that something must be wrong with you, because you don't crave the crowd the way others do. But here's the truth they never told you. You didn't withdraw because you were weak. You withdrew because you were perceptive. When you can feel the unspoken tension in a room, when you can sense the resentment behind a smile, when you absorb the moods of everyone around you whether you want to or not, being in crowds isn't fun. It's exhausting. It's like being a radio that picks up every station at once with no way to turn down the volume. So you learn to retreat, not out of fear, out of survival. Solitude became the only place where the noise stopped, the only place where you could finally hear yourself. And, though you may not have had the words for it then, hear God. I want you to picture something. A family gathering, maybe a holiday, the house full of relatives, the kitchen loud, everyone talking over each other. And somewhere in the middle of it, there's you, maybe 8 years old, maybe 48, quietly slipping away to a back bedroom, or the porch, or just standing alone in the hallway for a minute, breathing. And someone always notices. Someone always says it. What's wrong with you? Come back and join everyone. Why are you always off by yourself? As if there were something defective about needing air. As if the most natural thing in the world, a sensitive soul needing to step out of the storm, were a personal insult to everyone else. You weren't being rude. You were doing what you had to do to keep from being completely overwhelmed, while everyone else could let the noise roll off them. You were absorbing every word, every glance, every undercurrent of tension nobody was admitting to. And after an hour of that, you were spent in a way they would never understand because they simply weren't built to feel what you feel. Think about Elijah. Here was a man who stood in front of an entire nation, who called down fire from heaven, who outran chariots, a man of immense power. And where did God meet him in his most important moment? Not in the crowd, not in the thunder, not in the earthquake or the fire. God met Elijah in the cave, in the silence, in a still small voice that could only be heard once everything else got quiet. Some of you have spent your whole lives feeling guilty for needing the cave, feeling like your need for solitude was a character flaw to overcome. But what if the cave was never your prison? What if the cave was your meeting place? What if every time you pulled away from the noise, you were doing exactly what the prophets did, making room to hear a voice that the crowd would have drowned out? The chosen have always been people of the wilderness. Moses spent 40 years in the desert before he ever saw a burning bush. John the Baptist lived in the wild places. Even Jesus, before his ministry began, was driven into the wilderness alone. There's a pattern here that's impossible to ignore. The ones God prepares for something significant are almost always the ones who first learn to be comfortable in solitude, because you cannot carry a clear word from God if your soul is always crowded with other people's voices. So that solitude you were shamed for, it was training, it was preparation. It was the wilderness shaping you for something the people criticizing you couldn't even imagine. But let's go back to the family, because I don't want to skip over it too quickly. I know some of you are still carrying it. Here's something that took me a long time to understand. And when I finally did, it set something free in me. The family doesn't reject the chosen one because of anything the chosen one does. The family rejects the chosen one because of what the chosen one reveals. Light has a way of exposing what's hidden in the dark, and not everyone wants to be exposed. When you walked into a room carrying conviction, carrying conscience, carrying that stubborn refusal to just go along with things that felt wrong, you didn't even have to say anything. Your very presence was a confrontation. Your integrity made other people feel their compromises. Your sensitivity made other people feel their numbness. And rather than rise to meet you, it was easier for them to push you down, to label you, to make you the problem so they'd never have to look at themselves. Think about David for a moment. The youngest, the one left out in the fields with the sheep, while his brothers got to stand before the prophet. When Samuel came to anoint a king, David's own father didn't even think to call him in from the field. He was that overlooked, that forgotten, the afterthought of his own household. And yet, he was the one God had already chosen, the one heaven had already crowned, while his family still saw him as nothing more than the kid who watched the sheep. I need you to hear this. The fact that your family couldn't see your worth does not mean your worth wasn't there. David was a king while he was still being treated like a servant. The anointing was already on him while his brothers still looked down on him. And the same can be true for you. What heaven says about you and what your family said about you were never the same sentence. They were never even written in the same language. And notice what David did after the anointing. He went right back to the sheep. He didn't storm into the house and announce that the prophet had chosen him. He didn't demand a new seat at the table. He carried his calling quietly, in his own heart, in the field, with no one around to validate it. Some of you are in that exact season right now. God has shown you something about who you are, about what you carry, and you've looked around for someone to confirm it, and there's no one. The people who should celebrate you can't even see you. And I'm telling you, that's all right. The anointing doesn't require an audience. David tended sheep with a king's calling on his head and no one watching. The field was where he learned the songs that would one day comfort a nation. The loneliness was the conservatory. Don't despise the field just because the family never came looking for you in it. And here's where it gets real. A lot of you have spent years trying to win the approval of people who were never going to give it. You bent yourself into shapes you were never meant to hold. You shrank. You apologized. You performed. You tried so hard to finally be accepted by the very people who built their whole sense of order around keeping you out. And it never worked, did it? Because you cannot earn your way into a place that was designed to reject you. The scapegoat role isn't about your behavior. You could have been perfect, and they still would have found a reason. Because the family didn't need you to be good. It needed you to be the problem. It needed somewhere to put all the shame it refused to carry itself. And the day you understand that, really understand it, is the day the chains start to loosen. Because you stop trying to fix something that was never yours to fix. Now let me say something to the part of you that still feels guilty. Some of you, even now, feel disloyal just for listening to this. You've spent so long protecting people who never protected you that even acknowledging the truth feels like betrayal. I understand that. It comes from a good heart. The scapegoat is almost always the most loyal one in the family. That's part of why the role gets assigned to them. They care the most. They try the hardest. They keep coming back hoping this time it'll be different. But loyalty to a lie is not a virtue. And honoring your family does not mean agreeing to be crushed by it. You can love people and still refuse to be their dumping ground. You can forgive people and still walk a different road than the one they tried to trap you on. I think about how many of you keep showing up. The phone rings and it's the same person who hurt you, and you answer anyway. The invitation comes to the same gathering where you always leave feeling smaller than when you arrived. And you go anyway, telling yourself maybe this time. You keep extending a hand that keeps getting slapped away, and you call it love. But somewhere in there, you have to learn the difference between love and self-abandonment. Love doesn't require you to keep volunteering for the role of family scapegoat. Love can set a boundary and still pray for the person on the other side of it. Joseph forgave his brothers, but he didn't do it from inside the pit. He did it from the palace, from the position God had carried him to. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let God take you somewhere they can't follow, and then extend grace from a place of wholeness instead of a place of wounds. You cannot pour healing onto others from a heart that's still bleeding out. First, God lifts you. Then, from that higher place, you can finally love them the way you always wanted to, without losing yourself in the process. If you've made it this far into what I'm sharing, I don't think it's an accident. There's a reason this found you, and there's a reason something in you is leaning in. So let me speak to that part of you directly. There are messages that pass through your eyes, and there are messages that pass through your spirit. If something in you recognized itself while watching, don't dismiss it. That is the Spirit confirming what was already written. The secret protocol carries 7 keys that unveil what heaven deposited in you before you ever arrived. Things no one around you has ever been able to name. It comes with the full audiobook for your moments of prayer, silence, and encounter with God. And you also receive the Awakening Map, the guide that illuminates the 5 seasons of spiritual awakening, revealing with precision exactly where you are and what comes next. The link is pinned in the first comment, but only for a limited time. Don't let this moment pass without a response. I share that with you not as a salesman, but as someone who walked this exact road. My name is George, and I spent the first part of my life being the family scapegoat, the difficult one, the one who felt everything and got blamed for everything. And it wasn't until I stopped trying to be understood by people who weren't equipped to understand me, and started seeking the one who formed me in the first place, that the whole picture finally came together. Everything I'm sharing with you, I'm sharing because I lived it. Because I needed someone to tell me these things 20 years ago, and no one did. So now let me tell you what nobody told me. The very wounds you think disqualified you are the credentials of your calling. The sensitivity they mocked is discernment. The solitude they pathologized is consecration. The questions you asked that got you in trouble were the beginning of wisdom. And the rejection, the deepest, most painful part of all of it, was the very thing that drove you toward God instead of toward a family that could never fill the place only He was meant to fill. Think about Hannah for a moment, a woman so misunderstood that even the priest assumed she was drunk when she was actually pouring out the deepest prayer of her life, misjudged in her holiest moment, mocked at home by a rival who had everything Hannah longed for. She wept. She couldn't even eat. And out of that exact place of being misunderstood and rejected, she gave birth to Samuel, one of the greatest prophets Israel ever knew. The rejection didn't end her story. It was the soil her destiny grew out of. That's how God works with the chosen. He doesn't waste the pain. He repurposes it. The thing that was meant to bury you becomes the very thing that plants you. But I have to be honest with you about something, because I don't want to leave you with a fairy tale. Walking this road is not easy. Being the one who sees, the one who feels, the one who can't just go along to get along. It costs something. There will be seasons where the solitude that once protected you starts to feel like loneliness, where you wonder if you'll ever find people who truly understand, where the temptation to go back, to shrink, to rejoin the old system just to not be alone becomes almost overwhelming. And in those moments, I want you to remember the wilderness. Remember that every person God ever used significantly went through a season where it looked like they'd been forgotten. Moses tending another man's sheep in the back of the desert. David hiding in caves while the king he was anointed to replace hunted him like an animal. Even Jesus in the garden, sweating drops of blood, asking if there was any other way. The road of the chosen always passes through a place that feels like abandonment. But abandonment and preparation often look identical from the inside. You can't always tell in the moment whether God has forgotten you or is forging you. And the enemy of your soul will always try to convince you it's the former, when the truth is the latter. So how do you know the difference? You don't, not always, not by your feelings. You know it by faith. You know it by the testimony of every person who walked this road before you and came out the other side and carrying something they could never have carried if they hadn't gone through the fire. Let me tell you what I've watched happen, again and again, in the lives of people who were the family scapegoat. There comes a turning point, a moment when they stop asking, why didn't they love me the way I needed, and start asking, what did all of this prepare me for? And in that each shift, something breaks open, because the energy that was draining out of them, chasing approval, replaying old wounds, trying to be understood, suddenly gets reclaimed. It gets pointed forward instead of backward. And that's when the gift that was buried under all that shame finally starts to come alive. I've seen scapegoats become the spiritual anchors of entire communities. I've seen the ones nobody understood become the ones everybody comes to for wisdom. I've seen the too sensitive child grow into the adult whose compassion changes lives, whose discernment protects people, whose hard-won understanding becomes a refuge for everyone else, who got pushed out and made to feel like a problem. The very things you were rejected for become the very things the world needs from you. But it can only happen once you stop hiding them and start honoring them. So here's what I want you to do with everything you've heard today. I want you to stop apologizing for how God made you. Stop treating your sensitivity like a sickness to be cured. Stop forcing yourself into rooms that drain your spirit just to prove you're not antisocial. Stop carrying shame that was never yours to begin with. Shame that belonged to a wounded family that needed somewhere to put it. You are not the problem. You never were. You were the lamp that got put under a basket by people who were afraid of the light. And the moment you take that lamp out and let it shine, you'll understand why heaven let you walk such a lonely road. Because lonely roads are how you learn to walk with God. And people who learn to walk with God in the wilderness become the people who lead others out of it. There's a reason you preferred being alone. There's a reason you felt everything so deeply. There's a reason you were the one they blamed. And it was never because something was wrong with you. It was because something was right with you. Something so right that a wounded world didn't know what to do with it except try to put it out. But it's still burning, isn't it? After everything they did, everything they said, all the years of being the outsider in your own home, there's still a fire in you. That fire is the proof. The chosen are never extinguished. They're only delayed, and your delay is not your denial. So before you go, I want to ask you something, and I want you to actually answer it in the comments. Not with something general, but with something real. I want you to tell me about the one moment. The one time growing up, when you got blamed for something that wasn't your fault. When you got labeled as the problem just for telling the truth or feeling too much. Name it just for yourself, and for everyone reading who needs to know they're not alone in it. Because the moment you name that wound out loud, you take back a piece of the power it held over you. And someone scrolling through those comments, carrying the exact same wound in silence, is going to read your words and finally understand that they were never the broken one either. Tell me about your pit, and then let's watch God turn it into a palace.